When I came here, I thought I have to be able to give you something better than when you came here in the first place when you leave. I have to give you hope and good information, factual information about things that are happening in our world today that will give you cause to be glad and cause to look forward to the future. And I think I can do that in all honesty in the little time that I have. I can tell you that things are happening around the world that are making the cause of freedom and truth a more successful and likely victor in the struggle between good and evil. I can tell you that from personal knowledge and from personal experience. And I can give you some information on it, and I can tell you that in the time we live, we are very fortunate because we are given the opportunity to fight for the greatest thing that has ever existed in this world, our faith. And we can do something in this world to lead others from the darkness in which we live to the light for which we seek to live in the end. And that, I think, is a noble vocation. But what do I mean about the struggle between good and evil? I mean, what am I talking about here? Do I know anything about what you're going through? Well, let's find out. I come from Canada. I've lived there all my life. I was born there in 1946 on the 24th of April. And consequently, in this month, I'll be 48 years old. I've been a lawyer for 23 years. In the early part of my life, I believed in recreating a new nation of Western Canada, which was free from the corruption of the country that Canada has become. It wasn't always like that, but as I grew older, I realized that it was being dragged into a cesspool of corruption and unfairness to everybody in it. I think you can understand that. You come from different countries, but you've probably seen the same thing in your countries. And you've wondered what you can do about it, and so did I. And so gradually I became involved in building a political movement for Western Canadian independence, a new nation of, for, and by the people of Western Canada. We live in a country that is really two countries and has become no country. We live in a country that was an English Canada and a French Canada, and there was no boundary clearly defined except the province of Quebec. And it was a country like a house divided. And you know what they say about a house divided, it cannot stand. And no nation can have within its bosom conflicting ideologies, conflicting language, or even effectively conflicting religion. The whole idea of multiculturalism has been a proven failure in Canada as it has everywhere else in the world that has been tried. And think about the existing realities today. The Soviet Union, the bastion of communism, where multiculturalism really originated as an idea, has been a total, complete failure. And the various ethnic nations of the Soviet Union are now independent and are going to be more so. We see it in many parts of Africa, the legitimate assertion of the identity of a people to be a nation and not to be anything else. We see it in the Balkans, the terrific conflict between the Serbs, the Croats, and the Muslims. It's an ethnic conflict, and it can only be resolved when ethnic people are in their own nation free to be themselves and to respect other nations. Surely, as we all do, we respect each other's property, but we live in our own houses, we live in our own homes, and we don't expect our neighbors to be entitled to walk into our kitchen without permission. No more so should we be expecting totally different cultural groups to walk in without permission to any nation that is worthy of the name. So that's why I wanted a country of Western Canada that was true to the ideals of my tradition and my culture and my language. That is the right of every free-thinking person throughout the world, and with no malice, but with the desire to be true to ourselves. And after a period of time, I realized that the real enemies of freedom were the people who fought against this idea. They wanted multiculturalism, they wanted internationalism, they wanted no truly harmonious ethnic homogeneity in any nation state. And I realized quickly that the media is hostile to the natural instincts of people. They have an ideology of liberalism or socialism or even communism in some cases. And their objective is to see to it that people don't develop naturally into political institutions that reflect their own values. And the media has been able to brainwash people throughout the world to a very large degree and very successfully, to deny them the right to be true to themselves. And I think that Lord Randolph Churchill said quite properly, properly informed trust the people, but they always have decided how they will be informed. And I think we have to become the means of our own information. And I'm going to speak about that in a little while, how we have to create a medium of communication so that we, as free-thinking, free-living people, true to God, true to ourselves, true to our identity, throughout the world can see that we have a cause that transcends national boundaries as well. Not the internationalist New World Order mission and vision, but our own national identity and our own natural cultures and languages that we intend to preserve, protect, and defend. So as this developed in my own experience, I got involved as a lawyer in some interesting cases, and not very many of them involved anything political. But I was in politics, and I was in founding of a political movement, which is actually becoming fairly successful now as an idea, not necessarily politically. Because Western Canada is becoming more and more independent, more people legitimate and authoritative, and establishment people are beginning to accept the idea that Canada is breaking up. Quebec will separate. The United States eventually will break up into various parts. Other countries will break up. Smaller nations will emerge, probably better nations in the end, true to themselves. So these things are happening politically at the same time as there is a force to oppress and deny freedom of expression. The internationalist idea, you could have called it communist, you could have called it socialist, the internationalist idea at one time used individualism to destroy the authority of basically Christian nation states. And they used individualism through the French Revolution and other things to say the individual must assert themselves and deny all authority. Well, now those people are in authority, and they want to say that the state has all the power to decide what the individual can think, and the individual has no right to be true, to seek the truth for themselves. That's why they want to silence James Keegstra, Ernst Zundel, Malcolm Ross, all of whom I represent, Lady Birdwood, whom I've also had the privilege of representing, because they represent an idea that the establishment, who are basically socialists in power, do not wish to have. They do not want to tolerate anymore. They don't respect individualism anymore, because they have the levers of power and now wish only to indoctrinate, as was indicated in George Orwell's 1984 and other books which talk about the totalitarian socialist mindset that now basically rules much of the so-called free world. And so the defeat of so-called communism does not mean the triumph of truth, because it has been substituted for the New World Order that has every bit as much intention of destroying truth as communism did in a more brutal and visible way. So we have insidious enemies of truth everywhere in the so-called free world. They're more insidious because they're more difficult to identify, and much more difficult, therefore, to combat with a rational defense of freedom of expression. We then, in Canada, were confronted with a number of cases. I mentioned the case, for example, of Ernst Zundel, with which you are familiar. It was under a law that prohibited the publication of false news, if you can imagine such a law. It's pretty amazing. Every newspaper in the country should be prosecuted under such a law. But nobody will prosecute a newspaper. They will only prosecute first the most unpopular person in the country. And at that time, in Toronto at least, it was Ernst Zundel. In Alberta, it was James Keegstra. I got involved in these cases because I was on the way to Mass one day and I was reading about James Keegstra. I think at that time I read the paper before I went to Mass, but maybe it was after. In any event, I was thinking about it all during Mass, and I thought, I know how unfortunate the press are, how much they lie about everybody, and they'd said such terrible things about this guy. I thought, he can't be as bad as he's made out because they say such terrible things about him. There must be something good about him. So I thought, well, maybe I'll write him a letter. And then I thought after a while, no, maybe I'll phone him and say, look, we understand what they're saying about you. And don't think that everybody believes it. Well, in the course of the conversation that followed, he said, "Are you a lawyer?" He had heard about me from political things. I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, would you represent me?" I thought, "Oh no, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't really considered that possibility. I had hoped that he had some other means, you know." Here I was in a place called Victoria, and he was in Alberta, which is a province away. Oh, about maybe 1,000 miles away. You know, it's a long way. Not as far as it is now from here to my home, but that's how these things happen, you know. You start out with a journey of 1,000 miles, or maybe you start out with a journey of a single step, but you never know how long it's going to take you. I promise you, this won't take more than an hour. Anyway, it developed that I took the case for James Keegstra. And it was a battle that was to last for, it's still going on. I'm still representing him, and it's still in the courts. And that was in 1984, so it's been 10 years. I argued in the Court of Appeal of Alberta, the second appeal, actually the third appeal, in 1994, in February. That's right. These things tend to get a little confused. But in February of this year, we were in the Court of Appeal for the third time. I'll explain how it happened. I represented him in a trial, 6 weeks long. We called evidence from his background of everything that showed that he had reasons to believe, and a religious defense exists for this. If you have a sincere belief, bona fide religious belief, basically you should be acquitted. Well, the media decides what juries think, most of the time. And the juries have convicted James Keegstra and Ernst Sundell twice. I really don't think they have any kind of objective view of the facts. They don't look at these people as if they were innocent until proven guilty. They look at these people as if they are terrible, they are diabolical, and they don't give them the slightest opportunity for any reasonable doubt. So that, you know, after a 6-week trial, and it was 50 years from 1925, so it was 60 years, I guess. Yes, it was 1985 when he was first convicted. To the day that Scopes was convicted in Tennessee, the Scopes monkey trial. You all heard about that? That was a famous trial for a teacher who taught that man descended from apes, you see. And that was a heresy at that time, and he was prosecuted, and 60 years to the day later, a man in Calgary, or Edmonton, well, Red Deer at the time, was convicted for promoting hatred because he taught that Christ was God, and that no one comes to the Father but through me, and a few other things about those who were referred to in the Bible as the synagogue of Satan. So in any event, he paid the price. He was sentenced to a $5,000 fine. We appealed. We won the appeal. They appealed. If you don't mind not smoking, I hate to bother you, but my reason is I have a slight asthmatic condition, so if there's too much smoke, I'll just end up coughing and I won't be able to talk. Maybe that's until they light up another one. Sorry to bother you, but in any event, we appealed to the Court of Appeal, and we won on the constitutional ground, which was that this law was against the Canadian Constitution because it was an unreasonable limit on freedom of speech. The Crown appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada, and they held in a 5 to 4 that it was constitutional. And then it went back to the Court of Appeal for some other grounds that I had argued, and they allowed the appeal, so that was the second appeal. Then they ordered a new trial, and by this time Mr. Keegstra certainly had no money. He had really very little money in the first trial. The second time around he said, "I wouldn't inflict you with another trial where I know you can't get paid, so I'll do it myself, and if I lose, you can do the appeal. You will do the appeal. I hope you will do the appeal," he said. And of course I would. Anyway, he lost the trial and was sentenced now to a $3,000 fine. He must be getting to be a better person because the fine comes down anyway. So we appealed again in February. We were for the Court of Appeal again. And of course, they won't overturn the Supreme Court of Canada's decision. But since the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Keegstra, There has been a decision in the United States of America called RAV versus Minnesota, where a young man burned a cross on somebody's front yard and was convicted not for burning the cross or trespass or whatever else he may have done wrong, but for inciting hatred. And that statute was taken all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they said in a 7-0 decision, that law is unconstitutional. And you see, that happened after Keekstra's first hearing in the Supreme Court of Canada, which was made on the basis, and one of the reasons of the majority, which was only a majority of 1 out of the 9, one of the reasons, the main reason was, well, there's no authority in the United States on this, and they have a constitution like ours. So if there had been an authority, maybe things would be different, but there isn't any. So we're going to find that the law is constitutional. Well, now there is. And it's 7-0 the other way. So it's a significant advance for freedom of speech in the United States. The Keekstra case is still before the courts in Canada, and we're going to seek leave if we lose in the Court of Appeal. And we might not. But if we do, we will seek leave to the Supreme Court of Canada again, because the law is advanced, both the law in Canada and the law in the United States. So that's where that stands. You see, we do not surrender. That is the most important thing. And I say this also in regard to Lady Birdwood. She has really nothing to lose in quitting at this point. She's not going to be imprisoned, in all probability. She has a fine of £500. She has £500 to pay towards the costs. She's paid an enormous amount of money to pay for her lawyers, her solicitor and her barrister, and that's been very expensive and difficult, I'm sure, for her. And I was her barrister, so I should know. And she has a 3-month suspended sentence, suspended, I think, for 2 years. And so that's where she stands. But, basically, it would cost her more to go on than it would cost her to stop. As it did with, for example, Keekstra. He could have quit with a $5,000 fine. Instead of that, he spent $40,000 or $50,000 for transcripts of a 6-week trial. You imagine how much that is. Because he was fighting for the right to tell what he believes is the truth. And that, I believe, to be the most honorable thing for anybody to do, not just for themselves, but for the rights, the freedoms, the seeking of truth by every other member of society. And in this day and age, you do not have to sacrifice your life for what you believe. Thank God, that none of us has been called to make the ultimate sacrifice. Maybe if we are, we should. And if we are someday, we should. But so far, thank God, we haven't been asked to die, and no members of our families have been murdered for what they say or what they believe. But the privilege is that we can make a little sacrifice in money, in time, and in work, and in intelligence, and in reason, and in argument, to persuade the world that truth will prevail if freedom exists for various ideas to fight with each other in the open marketplace of a free and democratic society. The enemies of freedom do not want the truth to be told. Not because they can defeat it, because they can't defeat it. That's why they must have silence for certain ideas. That's why censorship exists, and that's why we have to fight against censorship and for free speech. Because we believe, and I believe, that the average human being is endowed with sufficient intelligence that if they can hear both sides, and there are many sides to most arguments, but if they can hear all different points of view, they will find the truth. But the enemies of freedom do not wish people to find the truth. And therefore, all that is required of those of us who want the truth to prevail is to demand and to fight with every legal means to see that free speech exists in a real sense, so that really important things can be discussed openly without fear, without being obliged to hide in secret to express the truth. You should demand that the police protect your rights of freedom. There is no such thing as a heckler's veto, that they can silence a person by threats of violence against that person. That's the tactic now being used all over Canada and the United States. This must be stopped by legal means because it is the right of everyone to speak. Communists can speak, no question. Communists can speak. If someone tries to shut down a communist meeting, the police will be there to protect them. They must be there to protect everybody else too. Even those people who have different views that are on the right must demand the same legal rights as everybody else, and if they get them by legal means, they will be able to prevail because truth will prevail. That's our faith. That's what I believe. So the struggle goes on for James Keegstra. Now Malcolm Ross has won a major victory in the New Brunswick Court of Appeal. We argued before this latest tribunal of political correctness called human rights tribunals in Canada. And they are without a doubt the worst. They are politically appointed. There are no legal rights in these hearings. They can hear whatever evidence they want. They can disregard the rules of evidence. And they make politically correct decisions, and they're made not by judges, but they're made by political appointees, appointed on an ad hoc basis. And if they do the right thing, in quotes, they get reappointed. If they do the wrong thing and fight against the commission, of whom they are a member, well, then they don't get appointed again, right? So it's obvious these are political hacks. They're not judges. They're not impartial. They have no tenure. And they're paid basically to enforce political correctness. And I don't think I'm saying anything that hasn't been said in Canada, so it's not illegal what I've said. It's not contempt of court. They're not a court. They're a commission. And a commission carries out very often, a political purpose, and they do. Malcolm Ross was before the Human Rights Commission on a charge that he, by publishing a book, didn't break any law, but he was, because his book was reviewed as anti-Semitic, he was therefore denied the right to be a school teacher because he was a bad role model. And this process would eliminate from any position of authority a person who had politically unacceptable views. That's what the bottom line is. So before the commission, we argued for a long time, I don't know, 3 weeks, something like that. These trials go on so long, they bankrupt people, they wear them down. The government has lots of money, and the government funds all these prosecutions. But we must be persevering against this type of tyranny. And Malcolm Ross has persevered. He's an ordinary guy, a school teacher. He's got 4 children, a lovely wife, a very small, modest home. His brother is a school principal, lives next door to him. He's a very decent, honorable Christian man. And without that faith, it's very hard to persevere through a lot of adversity without faith. Very hard indeed. And I know that maybe you don't all agree with me on this. I don't mind that. But I can tell you that with Malcolm Ross, his faith has brought him through an awful lot of difficult times. And his family stand behind him. That's very important. I know how difficult it is if your family doesn't stand behind you. Very difficult. He then appealed to the Court of Queen's Bench in New Brunswick. And there were orders against him that basically the Human Rights Commission said, you've got to fire Malcolm Ross or relocate him out of the classroom, and if you can't find him a job out of the classroom, he's got to be fired. We argue and that if he ever publishes his views again, get this, if he ever publishes his views again in any way, he must be fired anyhow. That's even if he wasn't teaching. If he was a janitor in the school and he published his views, he had to be fired. Well, we appealed against that, and the Court of Queen's Bench judge said, well, I'm not going to upset the decision that he can't be a teacher, but I'm going to say, for goodness sake, if he wants to publish a book and he's a janitor, then it's not a role model as a teacher that can, so he can publish whatever he wants. He removed that part of the order. We said, that's not good enough. We appealed to the Court of Appeal in New Brunswick. And we said this, first of all, there's nothing illegal about what Malcolm Ross has published. Second, he's not criminal or anything. There is a law in Canada that survived in Keegstra's case in the Supreme Court by 5-4, I think, or 4-3 anyway, by 1 vote, which allows that you can commit hate crimes in Canada, which is promoting hatred, subject to the defenses which there are. But he wasn't prosecuted under that, so he's not a criminal. His views are quite legal in Canada, so he cannot be discriminated against any more than anybody else's views. The Court of Appeal agreed with us, 2 to 1. And you can imagine there was, from one end of the country to the other, there's a hue and cry, an outcry. Irving Avella, the Canadian Jewish Congress leader, president, or whatever he is, said that there must be an appeal. So now there's leave to appeal being sought in the Supreme Court of Canada, and I've answered their application, and it's reserved, so it takes some time. We'll find out whether they have a right to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada or not. If they do, I think the Supreme Court of Canada will probably rule that not so much that the law is invalid. In this case, we're not attacking the Human Rights Commission's powers as much as we're attacking the order itself, which is an unreasonable limit on freedom of speech. And our Constitution says you can attack laws or you can attack orders which are unconstitutional if they're unreasonable limits on freedom of speech. I get kind of wound up in these because these are kind of interesting to me, and I hope they're interesting to you too, because they are important cases involving your freedom too, you know? We've got to realize that whatever happens in Britain eventually affects us, wherever we are in the world. Whatever happens in Canada is used as precedent and is gradually adopted in other countries. So that's why I think it's important to realize what's going on. Ernst Zundel was another fight that lasted 10 years. Now let's be honest, there were 2 long jury trials, 2 convictions, 2 appeals, in fact 3 appeals, and finally once to the Supreme Court of Canada. And we succeeded in the end after Mr. Zundel must have spent $1 million, and I assure you he didn't spend it on his lawyer, but on witnesses, on transcripts, which transcripts cost like $100,000, which is 50,000 pounds. You know, to put this in real terms, it would have been so much easier for him to take, he first got 9 months in jail, and then he got, he got 15 months in jail, and then he got 9 months on the second sentence. He appealed, but it would have been easier to take those 9 months in jail than spend the time, the effort, and the energy that he did, appealing all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And when he got there, they said all those criminal proceedings were all invalid, but he not got 1 penny back. So just think about that. But he won a major victory for freedom of speech. And it wouldn't have been possible without the help of a lot of people, many of whom I suspect are here or throughout the world, who helped Ernst Zundel. And what I'm going to discuss in a few moments is the importance of realizing that if one person's freedom is attacked, we must all come to that person's defense. It is important and very essential that we realize that no one should ever stand alone in the expression of their personal beliefs and be criticized even or be prosecuted. That should never happen. As long as there are courageous men and women, it won't happen, but we must be those courageous men and women. There is nobody else in the world who will do it besides us. You know, everything starts with me, in a sense. We first have to put our personal life in order, get our priorities straight. Then we have to realize that those around us who need help should get it from us. And therefore, further, we should organize other people so that meetings like this are taking place all over the world in defense of freedom of speech and to the defense of our culture and our heritage of freedom. And in effect, eventually, also our faith, because that is the ultimate objective of the devil, and to destroy the Christian faith. So don't forget that. That in the end, although we may be defending freedom of speech for people who are not religious necessarily, the ultimate target is not those people. The ultimate target of the enemies of freedom is Christianity itself, and the individual freedom to seek to know, love, and serve God, to find the truth, which ultimately is our only purpose in this world, to be honest. And so we must realize that we're defending important principles at a distance. Do not wait until the enemy is within your gates to build your defense. And therefore we must build a strong bulwark throughout the world of freedom so that truth can prevail. Now, I may be wrong about what the truth actually is. I don't claim to be infallible on matters of faith, morals, or truth. I have my views, as we all do. They're my opinion. I share them with you if you ask me, and I tell you if you don't want to know. But the truth is that I think we share this much together, that we know that to find truth there must be freedom to seek it. Seek and you shall find, as it has always been true. And we must be free to find that truth for ourselves. So that's basically what motivates my concern for the freedom of people like Malcolm Ross, Ernst Zundel, and James Keecher. Now there's been other things done with human rights legislation which are even more incredible. I mean, after all, to publish a book and to silence a teacher who speaks in class, as James Keecher did, about his beliefs, is amazing. I would never believe it possible in Stalinist Russia. But it was possible in Canada, and nobody even got upset. They accepted it. They should be outraged. The media should have been outraged, not for the values of these people. They might not agree. They should have been angry. We should all be angry about it. And what absolutely amazed, inflamed, and infuriated me is that people said, oh, well, so what? Some of them said, well, he deserves it, obviously. Well, that just made me absolutely incredulous of the intelligence of these people. It's beyond my comprehension how anyone with a brain could tolerate the belief that an imbecile prime minister could decide these matters for everybody in the country. But, so we had to do something about it. We did something about it. We destroyed a tyrannical law by legal means in the case of Relentless. We have not surrendered to a tyrannical law in the case of James Keegstra. In the case of Malcolm Ross, we did not surrender to a tyrannical Human Rights Commission tribunal of one person who decided what was a legitimate religious belief. Can you imagine? The Pope himself has no such authority anymore, apparently, for most people. But this was a basically politically appointed law professor by the name of Brian Bruce, who deemed it within his power to decide what was a legitimate religious expression. Think about it. This man hasn't got the first step of a theological degree and has no right before God or man to decide what is a legitimate religious belief. He did. We're not going to accept that. We've gone as far as we can and we've won. But of course the enemies of freedom are relentless. They do not quit. They will never allow a person, once they have taken them as a target, to survive if there is one possible means of attack further. And we must realize that if you ever take on the enemies of freedom, you must not put down the sword and the shield. You cannot take up your cross and put it down another day and say, oh well, I've had enough this week, this month, or this year. It is the struggle not of a day, of a month, of a year, but of a lifetime. And it is the best struggle of a lifetime. Very rewarding. Not just in monetary terms, Lady Birdwood. I must say, thanks to you, in this situation it has not been as heavy a burden as it has in many other cases. But it has been a spiritually rewarding experience beyond any monetary terms, both to know Lady Birdwood, to understand what she is as a human being, as a person, to be inspired by her, and to be inspired as I have been by other courageous people, and to have the privilege of meeting you, and coming all this way to find there are people who value freedom and who value truth throughout the world, as you are here. It is heartening, and I will carry back the message of your concern to other people, and they will be encouraged to know that there are men and women in Britain who are struggling for freedom too, and against even heavier odds in some cases than they are. So the cause of freedom goes on, the struggle goes on, and those are victories, you know, those are really major victories, but not without great price and without great sacrifice. Our families suffer. I think maybe I'll know that more in the future than I have in the past, I don't know. But we have paid a heavy price, and we will continue to do so. But as I say, a price that is really minuscule in comparison to the rewards, the spiritual, and I must say, you know, not for one moment have I suffered in any real material way. I have not starved, I had to sleep without a roof over my head, I have not feared for, the loyalty of my friends. I know who are my friends, and I know who are my enemies. And the line is clearly drawn, and the day my office is smashed with a rock, I know who it is. I do not retaliate. I do not wish to retaliate. I wish to survive, to fight the spiritual war in a lawful manner. And that's what irritates them. You take up their methods and respond to violence with violence, and the devil wins. You take up the methods of fighting for truth with reason, with courage, with integrity, the devil loses. And that's really who we're fighting. The devil in human form manifested through a number of people. Don't ever think that you can win against the devil by adopting the methods of the devil, because you can't. So we must realize that Christianity gives us a very practical solution to these frustrating problems. First of all, we know that nothing we will do in our lives will require of us the sacrifices made by our Lord. None of us will be crucified. None of us will be humiliated, and we all deserve it as he did not deserve it. So no injustice that we suffer, and you have all suffered some injustice, as have I. I've been falsely accused of many things, maligned in the media. My name and reputation have been, humiliated as much as possible. But none of that injustice will ever come close to the injustice suffered by our Lord. And after all, we have his promise that those injustices in his name will be our reward in heaven. So, as we keep that faith, none of these sacrifices will in any way diminish our happiness. And of course, he wants us to be truly happy, and that is the source of true happiness, to know we've done our duty, we have fought the good fight, and we have done it with the weapons of faith, which are, truth and justice and mercy and our integrity. And we are not soiled by the lies of this world. So that's a real consolation and a very practical solution to the frustrations we face in this struggle. And there are many frustrations. And I say too, many victories. Many spiritual and amazing victories. And we're struggling again in Canada against these human rights commissions. I was going to tell you a few examples of how crazy they get. One of the worst cases is against a guy called Wolfgang Droge, who is head of something called the Heritage Front. And I don't represent him, but I read about it in the paper, and I hear about it from people directly. He's representing himself because they simply can't get anybody in Toronto, and after the barrage of bad press and lies that were promoted against me, the Law Society of Ontario is wavering as to whether I could get back again to take a case occasionally, which I have done, of course, a number of times, but they're trying to make that difficult. I haven't pressed it because no one's asked me. There's been never any finding of anything improper in my conduct, but there have been many allegations which were reported in the press as if they were true, and then the Law Society says, well, we've looked at the allegations, and they are without foundation, or in the alternative, we don't think that they constitute misconduct. So, in view of all that, Wolfgang Droge and others in Ontario at the moment are representing themselves, and I must say they've done with some success. They have been ordered, though, and very interestingly, ordered not to speak to each other. And Wolfgang Droge is not allowed to talk to any member of the Heritage Front, nor any of them to talk to him. Not to talk to the media, not to speak in the press. Can you imagine all that? They wouldn't do this. I mean, how could they do this to anybody? He's not allowed to speak in the press, to talk to other members of the Heritage Front, or they're not allowed to talk to him. And of course, what they don't want is him to tell the world what's being done to him, so they must silence him. You see, censorship, when it gets totally out of hand and totally bizarre, becomes absurd. Well, the leading newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail, has written 2 editorials on this and totally criticized the Human Rights Commission because it makes Stalin look like a pussycat. These people are nuts. They're absolutely beyond belief. I can't talk to you, you can't talk to me, and I can't talk to the media? I mean, I wouldn't want to talk to them. They're going to lie about it, right? Most of the time. Well, that's what's happening. And, these people who want to control human minds and destroy human souls become totally ugly. They become symbols of the evil they represent. And people in the world are going to see this. No matter how much they try to silence the truth about who they are and what they do, it will become known. Because people can see for themselves. And consequently, even the major media are recognizing the absurdity of these human rights tribunals and the draconian measures they take and the steps they take. So those battles are going on. And I won't belabor them anymore. You can ask me any questions about them after. But I want to talk about something that I've been thinking about and I was surprised to find has been thought about here, and that is this. In order for our culture to survive and our ideals to survive, we must become capable of working together in a small way. First in the microcosm, in the small world around us, maybe later in the macrocosm. Large political institutions are disintegrating through the debts they have. Canada has enormous debts, is falling apart because of it. So is the United States. I don't know about Britain. Probably the same. It is essential that we create a sense of community where we can learn in greater depth about our identity and about our objectives, political, spiritual, and otherwise. I was thinking about the idea of forming communities around the world, taking over, buying towns, not having communism in the sense of everybody owning everything together, but each person owning their own home in a town, and thereby being close enough that we can share in work, have our own manufacturing base in small towns, work together and volunteer and create a sense of community. This particular place is a very beautiful community, and I think in a sense we're here in a spirit of community. This very present place is capable of being a focus and a gathering point due to the generosity of the lady owner here. These are places where our culture can be communicated. And we've got to be able to communicate with each other. This video might be useful in that regard, in the sense that people might watch it who would not be able to be here. But it's essential that we have time together. Now, we're not going to have more than an hour. You're not going to really know Douglas Christie in any way that, might help you. And I don't get the privilege of knowing you and sharing your knowledge or experience. But if we lived in an immediate vicinity where we worked together on some constructive business, I don't care, manufacturing furniture or printing books or writing literature or creating videotape, doing whatever is necessary to create an income for individuals on the basis of work, and to share spiritual values, hopefully in some form of common worship that could occur. Then you see, you can create a place for our older people to be cared for when they become old and when we all die. I see people in my own group of friends who are living in nursing homes being cared for by people who hate the things they believe in. And they're paying them money to look after them when they could be cared for in a community where their values are respected, their person is genuinely cherished as a servant of truth, who, as we all will eventually, face the end of our days, but not without friends, you see. These could be in communities where we will be bound together by loyalty to our ideals, and therefore care for each other and cherish and nurture each other. Because we all live in different parts of the world. We're attacked by our neighbors in many cases, and in many ways we suffer by not having a sense of community around us. Now, we do in a sense, but we could create environments in which, for example, children can be properly educated and avoid the indoctrination of the politically correct school systems of which many of us are obliged to participate. I think, essentially, for our ideals to continue, there has to be children. There has to be children, of course, and there has to be families. And this is the best way to develop a feeling of our natural relationship with both our ancestors, our descendants, with God, with our community. That we have to feel that we have roots, that we are sacrificing not for no cause and no purpose, but there will be children who will cherish what we have decided and fought for. This has to be the development of a spirit of community where we know there will be continuity. Because, the world around us is in chaos. With the breakup of the Roman Empire, for instance, and Christianity existed at that time in the Roman Empire, the Roman Catholic Church originated within the Roman Empire, there was a time when Christianity was under attack. And you know what they did? They built monastic fortresses, in effect. And I'm saying we live in a time when it's not as obvious as the breakdown of the Roman Empire, but we live in a time of moral chaos. We live in a time where out there in the world is absolute destruction for what we cherish and what we really believe. And in order to preserve it, we have to gather around us people who share our values, support them, work together, so that we survive. Kind of a secular monastic tradition. I don't know if it's possible, but I think it is. It would mean that we would have to set priorities for ourselves, put aside certain materialistic things that seem to preoccupy us, and decide that I can give to a group of people something of value, whatever it is. We all have talents. I mean, my talent, I can cut firewood and I can make brick walls. I can do this. Actually, not very good. Brick walls, no. Stone walls I make, but not brick walls. And you know, I mean, if we were to have even a place, for example, like this, it's beautiful, right? People could create gardens, right? They could create gardens, but that takes work. And they can't do that if they're preoccupied with something else, thousands of miles away, right? They have to live where they could work. And it is essential that we create around us a garden of some sort. Not necessarily a physical garden, but a spiritual garden, a social garden in which we live in harmony with those who share our beliefs. I sincerely believe that the time has come when, living in isolation, we can die in an intellectual and moral spiritual desert, when we could gather together people who would build a fortress of spiritual and material integrity and strength. And I don't think that will be possible unless we make certain sacrifices. So the question we must each individually ask is, should we make those sacrifices, and when and how should we do so? And I can't answer that question for anyone. But for myself, we are in Canada looking for places where, for example, we can hold meetings. I don't know about this situation, but in Canada, when David Irving spoke in a meeting we had arranged in Victoria, he was arrested. He was, of course, later deported from Canada due to an arrangement that he made to voluntarily leave, which I wouldn't have encouraged him to make. But it was unfortunate under a circumstance where he was alone without advice and was pressured by terrific threats and inducements that he should agree to do what in effect they would prevent him from doing. It was a trap that he was coerced into falling into. And later he suffered a terrible injustice by a decision which I found to be totally without factual basis. But in any event, we saw there what happens when you try to hold a meeting. And we've got to be able, in a free society, to peacefully hold meetings. This is not a suggestion of any criminal conduct. What are we criminals that we must hide in the basement like the early Christians apparently had to meet in secret? It was said somewhere they met in an upper room and the doors were locked for fear of I don't know what, but you might fill in the blanks. As a matter of fact, that's not what it says in the latest of missalettes that I've been able to see, because it's referred to as for fear of the authorities, I believe. In any event, there has to be a means where children can be educated, where people of mature age can work, where people of old age can be cared for, and without fear of violence, without fear of attack, and in an environment where they can speak their minds. And that, of course, is something we're developing in Canada for people like us, who basically hold these values and beliefs. So I don't think I should belabor the point. I've spoken for a while. I guess, am I up to an hour yet? Am I,
50 minutes.
50 minutes. Well, that's close enough. I guess I should say, in conclusion, thank you so much for being here. Some of you have come quite a distance.